Alors, hello everybody. Bonjour. This morning, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to present my research in the French-speaking Pacific and focusing on the French territories. So this morning, I'll be talking to you about an ongoing project that I am carrying in the French Polynesia, and that's been supported by one of our research grants at the University of Wollongong. And I know that our Associate Dean Research, Tony, is there. And so thank you for enabling that with your team. So in a nutshell, I am a sociolinguist, and I look at a linguistic phenomenon which is called diglossia, and that affects multilingual societies affected by colonialism. And in these societies, there are various languages that are used to perform different but often, and that's important, complementary functions. And some of these languages have got higher status than others, and so they are perceived like this by the community, and language attitudes are influenced by these perceptions. And a problem that we have in these societies, often it's a recurring problem, which is that ancestral or heritage or indigenous languages are in decline because they are not perceived as having the same values as the dominant language. So in these societies, in the French-speaking Pacific and the Indian Oceans region, the dominant languages are colonial languages. And I'm thinking English and French both. So just to start with, the motivation for my study has been, as I was saying to you, small grant that I've got from my university to enable that. And the rationale, the reason for this is that there is a lack of interdisciplinary research in Oceania in the English language. Most of them have been carried out in French, which is perfectly understandable given that they are in the scholars or French in the French territories. But what we're aiming to do with this small grant and the research, my investigation, is to make sure that this research is accessible to Anglophone scholars, and having people who are multilingual have got a bit of an advantage that they can share. So in 2022, we signed the Memorandum of Understanding between my university, University of Wollongong, and the University of French Polynesia, and Tony is there, he can confirm that, which allowed us now to collaborate with both the second French-speaking university in the Pacific. We've already got a memorandum of understanding with the University of Nouvelle-Calédonie, which is fantastic, and we have added the second one. So the aim of this study that I am carrying out is to investigate multilingualism in French Polynesia and looking at what languages are being used, but focusing on the younger generations, because as you know, younger generations are the future in any society, and they are going to be among the future leaders. And so for this morning, I am going to focus on the extent that the traditional languages and cultures are sustained or being maintained, and what are the factors that are influencing this language maintenance. Because as we all know, it is very, very important to have an understanding of where we come from. Our past is incredibly important. It's important to know where we come from in order to inspire and keep us going for the future. And so, it's not going down. Polynesian languages. We have got 37 Polynesian languages in Polynesia, and 7 of them are located in French Polynesia alone, and they form part of the Oceanic group of languages, and they belong to a family called the Austronesian family of languages. And you have got always my references there, is from one of the very, top scholars of linguists, which I think some of you do know, Jacques Vernedon. I think he spent some time at the University University of New Caledonia, and I got the chance to meet him at the University of French Polynesia. Still working, still passionate, and he is wonderful. He helped me a lot with my field work when I went there. And so we've got them here in the triangle, if you can see, of Polynésie Française. And we went we had a New Colombo Plan grant, which allowed us to go there. And Tony went with his group of students in public health. And that's how that enabled me to do part of my field work as well. So trying to make sure that we do as much as we can during our overseas trip. And so the language diversity in French Polynesia, we have got a population of almost 280,000, which is a little bit less than New Caledonia. New Caledonia, I think, is almost 290,000, and colleagues can correct me if I'm wrong. And 3/4 of that population live on the islands of Tahiti and Moorea, where we went, simply because the jobs are there. So they travel to the main islands to study, and where they can find most of the jobs. The linguistic diversity, as I was saying, they were still Charpentier and François did the linguistic landscape, the atlas that they wrote, and they have noted 7 languages still being spoken, and you've got the names of the languages there. And in my study, I did find to some extent these languages were still being spoken, but by the grandparents' generation, and the languages have lost. And this is I'm going to come to that in a few more minutes. So I am investigating the decline and the factors why these languages are not being transmitted from one generation to the next. So this diversity, this multilingualism is under threat because they're not being transmitted. And so if this continues, there is a problem, there is an issue for the future, because if there is a lack and these languages are not sustained or not maintained, they are at a risk of disappearing and at a risk of losing the language, the cultures, and people's identities as well. And so the methodology, the research methodology that I used is the one that I have used previously in New Caledonia and also in my research in Mauritius, where I'm from in the Indian Ocean, is a questionnaire that I use. It is a multi-response questions, which allows people to complete by writing all the languages that they speak, because I'm studying the multilingualism, the extent to which the multilingualism is declining. And so for this sample, I carried out a pilot study first when we went in 2022. That gave me a bit of an idea to kind of refine my questionnaire. And the second field work on a larger sample was in February 2024. The sample that I'm going to talk to you about has got 72 participants in it, and we have got 12.5 are non-students. All of them are students. Remember, I am trying to focus on the younger section of the population, and they are students. And in the French system, like in the Australian system, everybody, all the teenagers have got to go to school. So this is where you can gather a representative sample. And the French education system for most is free, the higher education system. And this is also where you have got a good chance on finding most people who study. And of course, there are people who are not studying at university, and I'm very conscious of that. And that would be one of the restrictions of my sample. So data was collected by questionnaire, followed by a semi-structured interview, which was recorded. And of course, I transcribed them and analyzed them thematically. And so the research questions I'm focusing on this morning, it forms part of a bigger question, which is what languages do you use in a variety of domains, looking at the family, the work context, with friends, with strangers, to have a bit of a picture of multilingualism. And then for this morning, I'm going to focus on how the younger generations rated the importance. What language is important to them amongst the languages that they encounter every day or that they use, and also the usefulness, and understand why they choose that. And this is where it becomes very, very interesting for us, because as you will see here, of course, French comes first. It's a French territory. French is used in administration. It's the first language in daily life. That's not a problem. It's the formal language, the official language. But where it becomes interesting for us as sociolinguists is that, look at these in red there, language that is most useful for my sample of population, who are the youngest amongst the university students and 2 high schools, Lycée Polyvalent, where I went to collect my data, is that English comes second. And Polynesian languages, which are the ancestral languages, the heritage languages, come third. So there is a bit of language competition there. And in this second one, language importance, you have the same picture. French is always first, that's a given. But where English is kind of, in advance, has overtaken the heritage languages, this is why it becomes interesting, because that would explain why the languages are not being passed on. And looking at a little bit more there, for the reasons, in the interviews, of course, I collected with the same participants. I asked them voluntarily if they wanted to stay, because remember, they were in school at university, so they had classes. They couldn't often stay at back. So I asked them, what is it? What language do you use and why? And in analyzing thematically, there is something which is of a paradox, and that's what makes it interesting. And, you want to find out more. There is a desire to preserve the language. They're very, very conscious that that's their ancestral language. That's their heritage language. It's important to keep it. However, in the daily life, they don't practice it. So there is a bit of a disjuncture there. There is a Français local, almost like in Nouvelle-Calédonie. You have got the Français local, and this is where you have got the language switching and the language mixing phenomenon that happen, because this is where they mix Tahitian with French, and that's always evolving and changing. However, English is deemed to be the second most important language in French Polynesia, Tahiti, and also Moorea. And so in what I found, it's called a sociolinguistic paradox between what people desire and what's occurring on the ground. And even what was interesting, almost, the factor, one of the vigiles at the University of French Polynesia, when you enter, and he was always at the loge, he said to me, and what was very telling, I thought, at the University of French Polynesia, they have got, like in the University of Nouvelle-Calédonie, une licence of langue tahitienne polynésienne. And he said even the students who are enrolled in the Bihe Tahitian language, when they spoke to him, they didn't speak in Tahitian. They always spoke in French to him. So in terms of, I'm almost just wanting to check with you, Pauline, how much more? Do I have 5 more minutes left for my presentation? Yeah? Okay. All right. So where does it fit in terms of the language policy of French? It's being a French territory. It's important to understand France's language policy in terms of France and the regional languages, which this is where it fits in, the Tahitian languages and the New Caledonian languages as well. In 1951, so after the Second World War, it was the La Loi d'Aixonne which authorized the teaching and learning of regional languages in France. But you will see that they arrived, this law arrived in New Caledonia also and French Polynesia in the 1980s, so about 30 years later. It takes a long time, I think, to cross over to come to the Pacific, but this is a little bit long. And in 2004, there was a loi organique that recognized the use of Polynesian languages in education, and this is important, and I'll come to that. For the moment, so in my interviews, I said to you, I met with the Minister of Education, and he was almost newly elected in 2024 because they had the elections in 2023. And this is a pro-independentist government, which is currently in power now for the next 5 years since 2023. And so currently in elementary schools, only 2 hours 40 is consacré, given to the teaching and learning of Polynesian languages. In contrast, for English is a compulsory language in primary, secondary, and also at university, if you're doing, and 1 hour per day. So you can see it's For Polynesian languages, it's currently 50%. And that's what the Minister of Education wants to remedy. And that's why it becomes interesting. And this gives the reason also why today I'm giving my presentation in the Falah presentation, because it makes total sense and it's very encouraging. So in 2020, during the pandemic, colleagues at the University of French Polynesia, and I think some of you know them, did a bit of a pilot project to trial parité horaire, so teaching half of the curriculum, 50% in the Tahitian and 50% of the curriculum in French. And they did find out that that was very beneficial for student learning. Students were doing really well, and they kind of increased that. In 2022, there were 17 primary schools which were involved in that. And the Minister of Education is planning to have écoles immersives, like in Brittany, the D1 schools. And when I went in 2024 last year, he had just come back from Brittany, and his plan is to trial the same idea in French Polynesia, which brings me to the conclusion to say, yes, almost finished now. The ecosystem in French Polynesia is very different to the Dom-Tom, the Département d'Outre-mer, where you have got Creoles, which are lingua francas, and also in New Caledonia, where you have got 27 Kanak languages, plus Tayo, which is the only French Creole of the Pacific. So Polynesian languages are a minority. They're still present in the home, but with the older generations, and not. But these Polynesian languages are compatible with Tahitian, which is not the case in New Caledonia. And so I think I will finish with that last question that I have got there. The third stage beforehand, I'm planning to, in French Polynesia, in Wallis Island later this year in June, when we go to New Caledonia on our new Colombo Plan grant. And that will give me a last part of the rural French Polynesia that I would add to my research. And so the question I'll leave you with is, will policies by the pro-independentist government in power will suffice to revive and sustain the traditional languages and cultures? Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you for your patience. Thank you, Pauline.
Please. Hello, Anu.
Hello.
I'm Rowena from the University of Sydney. And something I wanted to ask is if you've considered, because the work I do with Christina and Corinne, my teammates, is around digital health. So things like social media and using that kind of media for health, and with young people. So it made me think about, have you considered sort of the social media that these young people are getting exposed to might be predominantly in English or French rather than their traditional languages? And likewise, if there's then a way to use those technologies as a vehicle for those local languages, maybe somehow.
Okay, thank you very much for your question, Rowena. Actually, yes, when I was having a chat to the participants, one of the questions was, so when you mix your languages, what language do you use when you are sending text, SMS messages to your mates? And the fascinating things were, almost all of them said either in English or in French. And very, very few sometimes said, oh, maybe one or two expressions. So majority is always, I'm sorry to have to say this, but it's the colonial dominant languages that we are losing. But with the Minister of Education, Mr. Teripaya, Dr. Teripaya, he is planning to have something which is fantastic. Not only media, but I think this is going to work better, is having les référents culturels in the classroom. These are the people, the parents, or who speak the language, to have them in the classroom, like we do, you know, to have a bit language assistance in the classrooms. So bringing that into the classroom. And not only they'll have the language, they'll have the culture, but they'll have the continuity between the classroom and outside of the classroom. But definitely they were also looking at media in terms of digital technologies, where they were training the teachers, first of all, and then having new resources so that people could be trained, but also could use those. So I think in the next few years, there will be a lot of work, and that's a new sector where a lot of work could be done there too. Yeah, definitely.
Maybe we should have a conversation in Sydney.
Absolutely. If you invite me, you can have a coffee. Were you at the Elsinore conference designed by your colleague? No, all the linguists last year in November.
Yes.
No, okay.
Were we? Okay, apparently we were. Corinne says we were. I don't remember this. A lot has happened.
Yeah.
Remember the name? This is the network, the Pacific.
Oh, Pacific Collective.
No.
No, it was Antonia Rubino and John Hayek from University of Melbourne. They were the the Language and Cultures Network of all the universities of Australia.
Yes.
Yeah. But yeah,
Very
definitely.
good.
It's not too far. Excellent.
Thank
See you
you.
soon.
You have a queue of questions. So
yeah. Congratulations, Anu. Great presentation. I just wanted to ask you, we've just come from a keynote from Gilbert David.
Yes.
And he talked about the challenges of integrating scientific and Western knowledge into traditional knowledge systems in the Pacific.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering how the attitudes among the young speakers that you interviewed in your research towards heritage languages may influence those efforts to revive and sustain those languages. Like, are there tensions between the revitalisation of these languages and the pressures of modernisation? And how might some linguistic policies best sort of navigate that?
Yes. This is a PhD thesis, Professor Tony Oakley, but I'll try and answer in 1 minute. I think there are lots there. The students I spoke to at the University of French Polynesia, and it was a science student, just said to me, if we had some resources, he would be ready to learn the language. And he also had, his parents were French, but he was born there and he had his Tahitian name. So I think resources will be important. And paradoxically, it's France which provides all the funding for in New Caledonia and also in French Polynesia. So definitely funding. But I think the second element that will allow that is really the politics. And if making the language compulsory at primary and also secondary, like they have done for English, and I suspect this is one of the reasons why English, of course, is the dominant language of the Pacific. And these younger generations are looking at coming to Australia, to New Zealand for studying and finding jobs. The third one is the socio-economic reason, because in the 1970s, and you folks will know it better than I do, when they had the Centre d'Expérimentation Nucléaire in Tahiti, you had to be able to speak French to get a job. So that and Tahitian. So the people came from the island, learned, of course, to speak French, but also Tahitian. So Tahitian is a lingua franca that in the other islands they do understand. So politics definitely, socioeconomic reasons as well, use the technology, and perhaps also teaching some of the science in the local languages might be good as well. And this is where the référent, the old teachers, could become useful. So there are lots of various factors that can be used there, as I see it.
Beaucoup.
Merci à vous.
Thank you for this very comprehensive answer. The last question. Good morning. I'm Corinne Caillot from the University of Sydney, and I worked with Rowena as well. Collaborated with Olivier Galli for a while, and I think it's more a comment than a question, but maybe this is going to reinforce the need for collaboration. So I'm in the field of health and physical activity, and with Olivier a few years ago, we created an education program that was digitalized using trackers and tablets. That was a 5 weeks program in which the aim was to build physical literacy in the young people, and we worked with adolescents that were 14 years old. And we implemented that program in Lifu, Loyalty Island in New Caledonia.
Yes.
And we wanted it to be relevant to the adolescents, to their place of living. And what we did is we had videos with leaders in local language, in Jiu, and we embedded those videos in local language into the program. Unfortunately, we didn't assess the impact of that, but just looking at how the adolescents reacting, seeing the local language from their community embedded in something that was designed by French people with a Western kind of approach was pretty amazing. So I think it was even more powerful because at that time in the high school, they had started to embed Jiu language in the curriculum. So the kids had maybe 1 hour every 2 weeks or something like that.
And that was amazing to see how the 1 minute video had an impact in the way they engage with the program compared to all the other things we had in the program.
Yes.
And we had also someone who is a leader in physical education and sport in the community to present the importance of physical activity in health outcomes.
Yes.
So I think maybe it reinforces the what you are saying about using languages and communicating and embedding languages and views of the world into
Yes. And I think, Corinne, you have got an excellent, you have got the rationale, the reason, the experience with connecting with, and I think this is less done. I'm sorry, this is a little bit of a criticism between New Caledonia and French Polynesia. When I asked the question to the Minister of Education, he said, we don't work a lot with New Caledonia. We're planning to do that. And that would be fantastic if that link could be made, because you have got the know-how, you have got the experience, and you have got all the tools to allow that. And obesity, as Tony will probably tell you and confirm, that's an issue in French Polynesia as well. So I think having us, all the scholars, working truly in a multidisciplinary perspective will help, and that would be so good to be able to do that.
Thank you.
Merci.